welcome to the One-on-One Show. My name is Duc Vu, and today we will discuss the topic of whether or not we are born good or bad. So what do we know so far? There are 3 pages of this topic essentially. Many philosophers have debated whether or not we are born good or bad. There are 2 polar extremes, one stating that we are born cruel, the other is that we are born good. Then there is the third side, and Sigmund Freud could attest to that side too. He is stating that we're born as a blank state, meaning that however we turn out to be is results of the environment of our parents and our experiences. Every single time I hear good or bad, I always have to cringe because I grew up as a foreigner in a different culture, meaning that I had to learn and in a sense adapt to different moral standards and codes for 2 different cultures. And thanks to that, I seem to be very relativistic towards these codes essentially, because one action is deemed as good in this culture and on the flip side is deemed as bad on that culture. Now, because I have adapted, in a sense, both points of view, I try to distance myself as much as I can from the good and or the bad. We should try to view things as they are and not as any sense of value that it presents. If somebody gets killed, we should state that he got killed, not that a bad thing necessarily happened to him, although most cultures would state so. Now this begs a question then. What and how will we define good or bad? To define good or bad, I would say that you are as good or as bad as you fit into the society. Because in the end, who is going to judge you for being good or bad? Either you yourself or others around you, surrounding you. And thus, whether or not you are good or bad depends on how others are viewing you or you viewing yourself. In the end, even if you knew you were good or bad, does it change the nature of your actions? Not necessarily. It can change your decision of whether or not you want to do that given action, of whether or not the benefits or the outcome of that given action is beneficial to you and or others. And maybe that could be considered either good or bad. But other than that, if you decide to take a candy from the store without actually paying, it's kind of relative to whether or not that is good or bad. Yes, you have committed crime by the law, indeed, but then again, how could it be good for you then, if you committed a crime which is a bad thing, as they say? Well, it could be good for you in the sense that you have saved some money, hence why you stole it. It may be bad in a sense that if you get caught, you will have to deal with the results of your action, indeed. And in that sense, it may be bad, because if you consider getting punished as a bad thing, well, yes, then it is a bad thing. So that is one way to think about good or bad. And thus, I'm asking myself, whether or not we are born good or bad, I would say we are born as who we are, not as good, neither as bad. And thus I can attest, and I will attest, or I stand by the words of Sigmund Freud, stating that we are born as a blank state, and yes, we do have some kind of primal instinct. Yes, our intelligence is driven by our needs, and yes, our needs will sometimes, and especially during our childhood and our newborn phase, they will overpower the moral code or ethics, because we have not developed enough intelligence to actually comprehend it. Is the child bad for taking something that is not theirs? A 3-year-old child. Does a 3-year-old child get punished for essentially stealing, in a sense, in this alternative situation that I'm trying to describe? No, it doesn't, because most adults are aware of the fact that children need some time to develop and to actually comprehend and to adapt the moral codes and standards of that given society in which they live in. And secondly, they are also aware of the fact that a willpower of a child is not strong enough to overcome his own needs of and impulses of his own limbic system. Now, another question would be, so are you then shaped by your environment and parents? To which I would say, yes, you definitely are. Then the question would be, does your environment make you and your parents make you good or bad? To which I would answer, yes, also. Because it doesn't matter what you do, it's essentially your surroundings and your parents who are going to judge you for being good or bad. So that is that. As I mentioned before, I always feel disgusted when I hear good or bad, and I try to distance myself from it as much as possible. So, is there even good and or bad? To which I would answer, there is, but in the end it is a social construct. Meaning, we will survive and thrive with or without this construct. We will live our lives, even if we were ignorant to that construct. Hell, before religion, there may have not even been a good or bad. Back in the days of cavemen, there may only have been a sense of survival, and that was all that was there to it. So this begs another question. Well, I may be religious. What does it mean for me? I believe in God, and God has not been disputed, nor He has been not approved, but His existence has not been yet confirmed. What does it mean to you? Well, in that case, I would say yes, there is a chance that there is an existence of God. It has not been disputed, nor has it been proved. But if there were a God and He came up with this good or bad phenomenon, then me personally, for me, my life would not change at all. I would still act on my own standards, which is essentially stating things how they are and not placing value on them. And secondly, even if I were to do something good or bad, knowing that there is an existence of God, how can God allow it? Good question to ask others, because most people usually deem God as this deity, this omnipotent power that is a good willing and intelligent force that is supposed to direct your life. Is that really so? And even if God exists, why does He allow these bad things to happen? Could it be because He wills it? Could it be because he perceives this balance between good or bad? Or could it be because he perhaps doesn't see things as values, good or bad? Perhaps the God just sees actions as actions. He just sees action and reaction. And thus, even if it turns out that there is a God, there is a chance that He doesn't care about you the way you wish He would. So that would be it. Good or bad, God or no God, doesn't change anything. And still, even if there were such situation, I would not necessarily say that eradicating the concept of good or bad would be beneficial to our society. As a matter of fact, I still stand for the argument that we need some morals to guide us through our lives and through our existence, because thanks to some values that we place upon the events that occur, we are geared to essentially experience them in a way that allows us to push through these quote-unquote bad times and to actually see some kind of a purpose in that given situation. Also, thanks to morals, we greatly and innately avoid conflicts which we could otherwise face. So that would be another point of view. And thus, one may ask that are morals more than the purpose? I would say not necessarily, but morals definitely help in some ways. Morals guide in some ways. They act in certain situations. And then purpose also acts in certain situations and certain ways. I would say a purpose would be a reason as to why. Morals, on the other hand, are more about a reason as to why not. Another question would be, the outcome and the benefit. So, as for the outcome, obviously the outcomes are always dependent on the circumstances, the situation, and the reaction of that given individual. So one action does not always equal that one given outcome. And also, one outcome does not necessarily mean benefit towards all. The way I see it is that if there is benefit on one side, there must be some kind of withdrawal on the other side. And thus, even though I state something to be quote-unquote beneficial, which means quote-unquote good, I would rather state it to be an outcome. Because an outcome always has a benefit and a negative side to it. I could provide an example like nuclear energy, and that would be the energy that we could gain from nuclear fusion, for example, would be of great benefit in a sense that the amounts of joules that we produce would be of a much greater, let us say, magnitude in comparison to coal burning, for example. But the negative would be, quote-unquote negative, would be risk of radiation. And that risk may be enough of a weight on a scale to actually make us paralyzed in order to analyze that given benefit of outcome. So I don't see, for example, nuclear energy as a good source of energy or a bad source of radiation. I just see nuclear energy as a nuclear energy that provides a much greater value or magnitude of energy in joules, and that also provides radiation, and that may be one of the deciding factors as to why we are not down the rabbit hole in this nuclear energy producing. So, that being said, I always speak about how I view things as they are, and I view what they do to me, what they do to others. Does it mean that I live solely for myself? That would be a tough question to answer, and I would be honest. I would dare to say yes, I do, as a matter of a fact, live for myself, because for my existence, nobody else is thriving in a way that nobody else is dependent on my existence other than myself. So by definition of things, yes, I do live for myself. Does it mean that I'm selfish? Not necessarily, because my goals are still to be quote unquote beneficial according to my own standards towards others. So to that I would say I'm not living for myself. Now, to wrap all things up, I've mentioned good or bad, the fact that it's all relative, the fact that you're as good as you fit into your society. Which brings me to the conclusion, and that could be a question. If you are as good and as bad as you fit into the society, meaning if you are as good as and as bad as others judge you, is there even anyone to judge you? From an objective standpoint, yes, there is. Yourself and other intelligent forms that have the function of judging. But what does it mean to? If I were to judge you for being yourself, what does it mean to? In the end, even if there is anyone to judge you, how does it impact your life? Because, let's be honest and let's be frank, and let's face it, if somebody judges you and you decide to change, the impulse to change didn't come from them judging you. The impulse to change came from the fact that you wanted to satisfy your own belief that you should change for them. And that would be a typical case, for example, in children that are trying to act in a way that made their parents proud. So what is the motivation? Other than the fact that psychology between a child and their parent is a little bit more complex than between one individual and the other individual, and their relationship is not bounded by parenthood. Yes, making your parents proud is essentially what makes you a child, in a sense, and thus the pressure to conform to your parents is something that nature has essentially gifted you in order to survive and thrive. Making your parents proud in a sense of moral codes and acting in a way that leads to them validating you as a good child is something and a product of this instinct. But this begs a question. Are you truly good for making your parents proud? Well, by their definition, you are, obviously. But looking at it objectively, I would say you are just a child trying to conform to your parents because that is, A, your instinct. Secondly, I would say later on, a social construct that is being pushed onto you, hence why you act that way. Doesn't mean you're bad or good. So this doesn't mean that I'm saying passing the good traits, quote unquote good traits, on your kids is a useless thing just because I'm here talking about how things don't matter, how others judging you doesn't matter, because in the end you are the one deciding whether or not you will succumb to their actions. No, that doesn't mean that I'm all against good or bad. On the other side, I have to be honest with myself, and this comes, even though I'm relativistic, I'm still a person who is adherent to society and contributes to society as well. And I'll have to be honest enough to myself to say that even though we are passing these things on our kids, there is this pressure, even though, in my opinion, it's not necessarily good or bad, I can objectively say that this way of raising children, of conditioning the society, leads to decreasing of conflicts between individuals, which, to be honest, I deem as at least less of a drag.